So the exercise that was assigned was to create a method that accepts two numbers and returns the sum of those numbers. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to teach you how to uh, think in a new way is what's known as divide and conquer. In other words, how to take a larger problem and divide it down into smaller steps. So this is an example of one of those smaller steps. So to start with, we're not going to worry about having a main yet. We're not going to think about where the numbers are coming from. We don't need to know. All that we need to do to start with is to create this method. And this is not too dissimilar from what you may be asked to do in the real world. You may be given a task, you're giving the requirements for that task, but you're not possibly told exactly all the details of how it's going to be used in the larger picture, and you may not need to know. So for now, we're just focusing on the method by itself. Later, we'll add in a main in order so that we can test the method. Okay, so in order to create a method, there are two main parts. What is the first part of a method? The header, right? We have the header of the method and then the body of the method. And the first word of the header is going to be public. I heard that. What's next? Static, correct. What's next? We're not creating a class. We're not creating a main yet. We're just creating the method. We'll add the rest in later. So we're just focusing in on the method. What is the next word here? It's not void. We're going to, the requirement is that this method returns the sum. So it needs to return a number. Okay, if we can go with double, we could go with int. I didn't specify, so we'll go with double. Now what's next? The name of the method. What do you want to call our method? It's not actually going to show the sum, right? That might happen back in main maybe, but this method is not required to show the sum. It's required to return the sum. So, count sum. Okay, how about return sum? Something like that. Okay. Now we have the parentheses. What goes in the parentheses? The numbers that we're using. So we have to decide what type the numbers are going to be. The question is, don't they have to be double since double is what's in the header? No, they do not. They do not have to match. What this word double means in this location is that the method is going to return a double. It has nothing to do with what's being passed into the method. Okay, we could pass something else into the method. We could pass nothing into the method and return a double. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to match, but we can make it match just to make our calculations easier. Otherwise, we'd have to do some typecasting possibly. So we'll go ahead and make it match. So there are going to be two variables of type double. And what do you want to call the first one? Num1, that works. Then a comma, and the second one. Good. Now we have the body. There's a couple ways we could go about this. What are your thoughts? At this point, we want to calculate the sum and return that value. There are a couple ways we could do this. Right. We could create a new variable. This is going to be a local variable that's going to hold the sum. And since it's local, it's only going to hold it temporarily while the function is running. Then later we have to make sure we return that sum because the local variable is going to disappear as soon as the method is complete. So double. And what do you want to call it? Sum works. Now we have to give that variable its value. What should its value be? Correct. Sum of num1 and num2. And how do you write that in terms of code? We don't actually need a bracket. We can just type num1 plus num2. And that works. We could put it in parentheses. It will not affect the outcome in this case. But that does it. And now we need to return that. What is the syntax to return? Return space sum, right? Not the same as the name of the method, which is return sum with no space, right? That space is critical. So that's it. That's our method. Now, of course, if you're submitting this as an assignment or at work, you need to throw in some more comments in here. But in interest of time, I'm going to skip that. So we have our method. But in order to make this a functional program, we have to have a class and we have to have a main. So let's go ahead and add that in now. How do we create the class? Correct. Public class. And we have to give it a name. What do you want to call it? What is it? 2arg. I already have a program named that. How about calculate sum? Calc sum. Okay. And at this point, we can save. Dr. Java will automatically name the file what I have named the class, which is what it needs to be. What's the next step? Right, our best friend, public, static, void, main, string, args. You should memorize that. It's your best friend. Okay. Now I did not specify where the numbers come from. You could prompt the user for these numbers, but I didn't require that. So just in interest of keeping this easy to run, and if this were an assignment, keep it easy to grade, we're going to hard code the numbers in. And there's a couple of different ways we could do that. What are your thoughts? Create two different variables. What type? They need to be double, right? Because our method is expecting variables of type double. Now, if you use a different type of variable, that's okay. I didn't specify, all right? The point is, it needs to match. Whatever variables you pass in have to be the same type as what the method is expecting. And what do you want to call them? We could call them num1 and num2, as long as we understand that these are not the same variables that are in the method. Okay, they're local variables. This num1 and num2 only exists in main, whereas this num1 and num2 only exists in return sum. They're local variables. We need to give them some values. Give me some numbers. 6.8 and num2 4.9. Okay, so there's our values. Now what? We have to run the method, and we have to do something to handle the value it's going to send back. There's a couple different ways we can handle that. Okay, we could create another variable called sum. I'll just go ahead and tack it on to here since it's also a double. So we have a third variable called sum, which will not be initialized because it's going to take on the value that's returned from the method. What does that look like in terms of code? Yep, sum equals return sum, parentheses. Correct. And we should probably display it so we can make sure it's working. So system.out.print line, and we'll display a nice message. The sum of, concatenate that with num1, concatenate that with, and concatenate that with num2, concatenate that with is, and we'll concatenate that with sum. And we'll throw in a period after the sum. Now we need a closing curly brace to end main. I'm going to go ahead and indent our method from before to make it the same level of indentation as the main. Now, this is not a requirement, but it does make the code easier on the eyes. You can see just visually what code belongs with what method. And we also need to close the class itself. So that curly brace needs to go at the very bottom. That should do it. Let's make sure it compiles. Okay, I have a typo. I forgot a plus sign. Try again. All right, compilation error went away. Let's run it. There it is. The sum of 6.8 and 4.9 is 11.7. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to actually shorten this a little bit. Okay, and this will also help to build your understanding of how this code works. So in the method, to start with, we followed this good practice of creating this variable to hold the value of the sum. But it turns out that since the operation is so simple, we don't actually need to do that. What we could do instead, we can get rid of that variable sum, and we could simply return num1 plus num2. The result of that operation will be a double. Let me make sure I don't have any errors. Still works. Okay, so we've eliminated that variable sum from the method and reduced the method to be just one line. Again, this is not a requirement. I'm just showing you ways that you can manipulate code to be slightly more efficient. And this is slightly more efficient for two reasons. Number one, we're not creating that variable sum, which is saving just a little bit of memory. And number two, it's one less operation. There's no assignment here. We skipped the assignment step. So there's one less operation taking place. Just slightly more efficient. Yes? What happens if you don't have parentheses around it? Would it send one of them back or just not a problem? It should still work. Let me make sure. Yeah, it still works. I just put the parentheses there as a visual cue, showing that we're returning this quantity. It makes it a little easier to read, but functionally it has no effect. All right. We can also do something similar in the main method. In other words, we don't actually need to have the variable sum in main either. Let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to eliminate the variable sum. I'm going to eliminate, well, before I eliminate this line, what I need is this part. Okay, return sum num1, num2. That the result of running that right there will be a double, a value of type double. So what I can do is I can actually put that right into the print line statement. And I can get rid of this. That might be a little difficult to read. Let me move that over. So this statement, which calls the method return sum, will result in a double. And we know that a double can be concatenated to a string in a print line statement. So this is legal. So again, we made the code just a little bit more efficient, possibly a little bit more difficult to read. So it's kind of a trade-off, but I just want to show you what some of the options are. Any questions on that? No questions? All right. Then let's move on to another exercise. It's going to be a lot of hands-on for the next 3 weeks. It's the best way to learn about these methods. So I've typed up the instructions here. What I would like you to do is to create a method that accepts two numbers and returns the result of the first number raised to the power of the second number. So in other words, if you pass into the method a 2 and a 3, then it would return 2 raised to the third power, which is 8. I'm going to put a caveat in here that I forgot to put in earlier. You may not use the power method or any similar method that is built into Java. Okay, in other words, there already is a power method in Java. It's part of the math class that does exactly this. I don't want you to use that. I want you to write your own. And I don't want you to use that method inside of your own. Okay? So I know I haven't given you too much time to think about it yet, but does anyone have a general idea how you might create a method to calculate the power as described here on your own without using a power method? Right. But the issue is you don't know ahead of time what those numbers are going to be. So what the student said here is that you're going to multiply the first number the number of times as specified by the second number, which is correct. So in this example, if you're past 2 and 3, you're going to multiply 2 times 2 times 2. That is correct. So the question is, if you don't know what the numbers are going to be, how can you create code to handle that? In other words, you don't know if you're going to get a 3 for the second number or a 5 for the second number or a 99,000 for the second number, okay, just hypothetically. So what code structure do we know about that could do that multiplication according to a number of times as specified by the argument that's passed in? A loop. Very good. While loop, for loop. Those are both valid options. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording now and let you work on this.